We are starting today a new series kind of based on the old television show Cheers. Is that cheesy? Well, mostly it was for Trisha. I mentioned it to Trisha, and she got so excited. And she said, yeah, I love it. And she had all these ideas, and she's not here today. But she'll listen online. She'll love it. Generally, I am really against television. My last sermon in Charlotte before I came out here, people were really excited or really nervous or really terrified because they thought I would tell them everything that last Sunday that I always wanted to say. Have you ever had that chance to tell someone everything you wanted to say? Well, in that last sermon, the big last message, I gave them three kind of last pieces of advice, and one of them was to circumcise their cable. Kids, if you don't know what that means, ask your mom. Sorry, Mom. So generally, I hate television, but I also believe that God can redeem even dumb things for the use of good. And so I'm going to set aside my kind of disdain for television and go back to my youth where I kind of had these characters, and here we go. If you watched Cheers, how many people did watch that show? Wow. I don't think we could have said anything in the church to raise that many hands. How many people breathe oxygen? If you watch it, these next 3 weeks might be kind of a trip down memory lane, and maybe you'll find some way to be open to God in unexpected, even cheesy kind of ways. Maybe you'll start noticing God in your regular life in new ways. Maybe you'll even come up to me afterwards. I bet someone will do this over the next 3 weeks and say, do you remember the episode where that happened? Because that would preach really well. There'd be that connection there. Trisha's probably already has a list, and she's going to tell me the next few weeks. If you didn't watch the show, if you're like the two people who didn't raise your hand just now, there's no problem there, because the truth in these next 3 weeks is way larger than anything we could squeeze into any sitcom. But we're going to take the characters, and we're going to take the story, and if I do my job at all, something's going to sound familiar to your life. We're going to echo some of the things in your life with these people on screen. That their struggles, your struggles, their joys, your joys, the confusions in their relationships and the confusions in your life. And hopefully, at some point, all of us will walk away with some new sense of God in our lives. For instance, in this church, we have a lot of people who, on one hand, are very down-to-earth, normal people that any of us could just go and talk to. And on the other hand, those same people are just super educated, and they know a ton of things. If you're new to this church, this is a remarkable fact. More than half the choir are just these PhD superstars over here, and you never know it if you talk to them, because in Netherlands it seems like everyone starts their chainsaw with one pull. Doesn't matter who you are and where you came from. But praise God that we have these kind of folks in our neighborhood. But in Cheers, there was a character named Frasier. And Frasier was your typical Boston, overeducated, ivory tower, professor-type person. He's wicked smart. Which makes you wonder what he's doing in a dingy bar with all those other doofuses. But for whatever that's worth, every episode you could count on Frasier to say something poignant. He could tell you where it came from. He could probably tell you a whole dissertation about what it means. And you can count on every episode when that happened, all the other guys in the bar would roll their eyes. It's just Frasier talking again. He's probably saying things that are helpful and true and maybe powerful, but no one really cares because he says them all the time. Do you know people kind of like that at all? Maybe a bit pedantic. Maybe they don't know their audience. And I lived in Boston for 3 years, so I ran across these people all the time. I was these people all the time. And Frasier and me, once in a while, we fall into the trap where we have knowledge, but not much wisdom. And getting fancy degrees on your wall, that's hard work, but wisdom takes a lot of work. Another character in there was Cliff. I like Cliff. Me and Cliff. Cliff was not as educated, but he knows everything. He has a story about everything. There was one episode where Cliff even gets on Jeopardy. He owns it. He gets almost every question right. He knows every question, right up until Final Jeopardy. And he bets everything, even though he's won by $1 million, and he bets everything, and he doesn't get the question right. And he's just cocky, and he fails. I once tried to get on Jeopardy in college, and I got to the last round. And you go, and it's not competitive. They just ask you a bunch of questions, and then they sit you down, and there's people, about 20 or 30 people, and they call out the 3 people from this region who are going to make it on the show, and they tell you the rest of you. Just tell all your friends you missed it by one question. They don't really tell you how many questions you missed, but if you ever hear someone say, I missed Jeopardy by one question, I didn't make it. I don't know. Maybe I was really dumb in there. But Cliff made it. And in every episode, Cliff would rip off some trivial fact about the world. And they were true. They might have been relevant. But everyone would totally ignore him. He was right about these things. It was even interesting at times. But they didn't care. And you probably know people like Cliff. You have friends that are know-it-alls. You have pastors that are know-it-alls. Cliff was full of information, but wisdom is far more than trivial. A couple other characters, if you watch the show at the beginning, Coach, or near the end, Woody took over his bartending job. And early in the series, Coach was this gentle old man, loyal, not really very smart. But he would do 5 dumb things, and then he would stumble into some brilliant aphorism, kind of like a Yogi Berra, and people would just think he was the greatest thing in the world. And Woody would do the same kind of thing. Woody was just this innocent and pure country bumpkin in the big city, just super ignorant. A couple days ago, I was at Native Foods down in Boulder, and I couldn't help overhearing the table next to me. And it was a guy who had graduated college a couple years ago and a girl who had graduated. And they were talking about their summers and how they were moving forward in life and all the struggles of being 22. And she was saying, I'm spending my summer really enriching myself. I've been reading a lot. And he says, oh, what have you been reading? And she says, Dante's Inferno. And he says, oh, who wrote that? She said, Dante. And he says, yeah, who wrote that? Yeah. Which is a great story for the sermon, but the fact is he was also the bouncer at the bar I was at last night, and he gave me a little stamp right here, and I thought, I've got to use this now, because there he is, right there. And Woody would do things like that, but the difference is that Woody would also stumble backwards into saying something brilliant. He was as dumb as a rock, but all of a sudden he would say something that changed your life. These two were accidental sages, and I wish I knew more people like this. People who they make Freudian slips that shine more light onto the subject than they really intended to. You all know what a Freudian slip is? Is this a normal thing? Because Freudian slip is when you say one thing and you mean a mother. Yes, got a couple of the psychotherapists here like, wait a minute, yeah. Coach and Woody were popular and they were likable, but I wouldn't say that they had much wisdom. You can't just stumble onto wisdom. Wisdom takes something special in your life to get there. And the point of all that, those characters, is that there are a lot of things in our world, a lot of great perspectives, a lot of truths, a lot of brilliant pieces of advice. The world is happy to tell you how to live your life and to manage your relationships, how to spend your time. You can go into a bar or a school or a coffee shop, or you can watch the internet and the television, and the world is happy to tell you what values are important for you. But Jesus, you heard it said, but I tell you something different. You heard it said that you should achieve, and you should succeed, and you should be better than everyone else. And you have heard it said that the only good life is to be smarter and stronger and richer and more morally perfect than your neighbor. But I tell you, Jesus embodied a simplicity and a humility that was just as weird back then as it would be today. You have heard it said that strength wins in this world. That's the way to handle all of our conflicts, international affairs, family arguments. Strength wins. You have heard it said that God smites those that are God's enemies. You have heard it said that man is the head of the household. You have heard it said that you are in control of your life. You should be in control of everything around you. But I tell you, you are addicted to anger and judgment and power. God tells you to aim for peace in all things. And God says to serve each other, all each others, as Christ serves the world. You have heard it said that you are special. Everyone in here is so special. Everything is about you and your rights and your freedoms, and nobody better step on my liberty, even if I have to step on others to keep my liberty. But God tells you, we are in this thing together. We are an earth-sized neighborhood relying on each other. You have heard it said that people get what they deserve. We love to bring people down. Celebrities, we love to punish. They need to learn from their mistakes. Others need to see their examples. But I tell you, there is a better way. God tells you that there is always a more graceful way. There was a line in there about turn the other cheek that you read. And sometimes we hear that, and we hear it's very, it sounds like Jesus is weak. Just slap me again. I'm a weakling. Mary, can I borrow you for a second? Yeah, I need to be right here. So in those days, you used your right hand. Your left hand wasn't for shaking hands. We do that today, right? Our right hands. So it was no one would touch anyone with their left hand. Okay, so with your right hand, give me a slap.
I'm good. And she's left-handed.
Just a little tap. Okay, so she slapped me with her right hand. Now, Jesus turns his other cheek, looks at her. Slap me with your right hand again. Yeah, you can't do it very much, can you? It's hard, it's awkward, and I'm staring you right in the face, and you don't want to slap me in front of all these people with your hand in the wrong face. Jesus had a way of disarming her power. It was a third way. He wasn't weak. He didn't fight. He stared someone in the eye, and he said, go ahead. Find a way to hurt me again. You've heard it said that strength wins and power wins and violence wins. And Jesus says there is another way to forgive and even to love and to challenge your enemies. Where the heck did this guy get these ideas? I mean, yeah, he's the Son of God and all that stuff. And he was educated. You know, we know that he had a deep knowledge of the Hebrew Bible. He's quoting it all the time. He must have had experience with shepherding and gardening, and he worked wood with his dad, so he kind of knew people. But where did he get the idea of how to tell a good story, and when to tell the right story, and when to use just the words that would touch someone deep in their heart? He knew a lot. Jesus had knowledge, and Jesus could connect with people. But more importantly, he had a wisdom that drew people to pay attention. Even if they didn't agree with him, they paid attention to him. Where does that come from? And what is that wisdom about? And how can that wisdom lead us today? 3 little questions, 3 little answers. We'll sing a beautiful song. Number 1, how did Jesus get wise? The quote in your bulletin at the front that was in the newspaper, the quote says, "The keepers of wisdom in our culture are the people who have experienced the most difficult things in their lives." And Jesus was born in a crisis of his time, with his governor apparently just slaughtering other children. And you can imagine Jesus growing up with this weight, knowing what happened because of him. And soon enough in his young life, Jesus was a refugee. He was an immigrant. I'm going to guess, since his dad was a carpenter, his dad probably worked a low-paying construction job in Egypt because he was willing to do it for cheaper. And probably the other Egyptians complained about these Hebrews who were coming in and taking our jobs. Who knows if Mary ever learned to speak Egyptian? Or maybe in school, little Jesus just spoke Hebrew and Aramaic and people picked on him for his accent. As Jesus grew up, the weight of his expectations that were on him must have been crippling. The complexity in his life, he had this father that he was drawn to, and yet he had a dad at home. When he was a teenager, his country was occupied by these Roman soldiers. And when that happens to your country, all your other teenage boys, they get angry. They have no other outlet but to go and shake their swords. And so you can imagine a lot of Jesus' teenage and early 20s friends must have been off dying. By the time Jesus became the preacher that we know, he had seen suffering. He knew pain. Well before the cross, his wisdom was born of struggle and of loss. And people paid attention to him because in their own struggle and loss, he said something different. So what's his wisdom about? The 2 things that we need when we are facing crises are hope and love. And Jesus was called to preach those things. He calls us to have faith, to trust in the wisdom of a God that never gives up on us, and to trust in the wisdom of a God who knit the whole world together with love. And this message was unusual, but if we can hear it today without the noise, without the static that gets layered on by so many other voices in our world, if we just hear what Jesus tells, his message can reach the core of us, especially when we are facing those same crises. And how can that lead us today? How can we set ourselves up for that wisdom to lead us today? Well, this might not be an exciting answer for you, but if Jesus' wisdom is going to impact our life, we should probably engage with that wisdom. And if we're going to engage in that wisdom, it probably means we should read what he said. I mean, like reading the Bible. It's a shocking thing this day and age. Even pastors don't do it enough. But if we want to learn about what he has to say, we should listen to what he says. And it probably means doing that with other people so that we're not just applying our ideas onto him. And it probably means doing that with prayer and allowing us to... Probably means challenging what I say. If you want to hear what Jesus is saying to you, challenge everything that I say up here and read it and find what he's saying to you. Because what he says is totally different and far more radical and life-changing than whatever the world can tell you. So what's he saying now? What wisdom is a shadow in your heart? In the face of all the knowledge you have, in the face of all the information you have, in face of all the entertainment that we put ourselves through, how can we live more into hope and into love that this world was made to be? Amen.